Baha'is on clearwaterbaha'is.org. We're with Miss Eileen Maddox, returning speaker of ours. We're so happy to have. And this week's topic is law and order from Hammurabi to Baha'u'llah. This Sunday, Eileen Maddox, a prolific author who has written various volumes that you are more than welcome to take a look at, starting with her inaugural book, 1844, Convergence in Prophecy for Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i Faith. You're welcome to check that book out, by the way, on Amazon.com. You can purchase it online. There's plenty of places to purchase it. 1844, Convergence in Prophecy for Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i Faith. This week's topic, Eileen invites us to explore the intricate themes of law, justice, and divine guidance in ancient texts through her program, Law and Order, from Hammurabi to Moses, inspired by contemporary society's increasing secularism and its often dismissive attitude towards the Hebrew Bible. Particularly, the misunderstood principle of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Eileen embarks on a comparative study. Her research navigates the historical and moral landscapes shaped by the Code of Hammurabi and the Codes of Moses, uncovering nuanced interpretations and remarkable insights. The program today is poised to challenge prevailing misconceptions by providing a comprehensive analysis of these ancient legal codes within their historical context. Eileen's investigation reveals the depth and complexity of the biblical phrase, shedding light on its application and significance in ancient times. By examining these codes, not just as historical artifacts, but as foundational texts that continue to influence contemporary legal and moral thought, the program aims to foster a deeper appreciation for the intricate relationship between divine guidance and human law. Join us today as we delve into this subject, where history, faith, and legal philosophy converge to offer a compelling perspective on the enduring wisdom of ancient texts. Again, to find more resources on this, please visit clearwaterbaha'is.org. And there is a Volume 3 special pre-order offer where you can go to soupllc.com for The Coming of the Glory, Volume 3 by Eileen Maddox. With that being said, Eileen, we're so happy to have you today. Again, we're happy that you've been able to grace us with your beautiful subjects on this show. And again, once more, we thank you.
Well, thank you, John, very much for a lovely introduction. And I have hit the share screen. And
I see it. You see Lady Justice with the balance in her hand.
Yes, but I don't see. There it is. And you still see, no, not that. This. And you still see Lady Justice, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
We see nothing else.
Wonderful. We are off and running. Thank you so much.
Very good.
Law and Order, featuring the Mesopotamian Code of Hammurabi and the teachings of Moses. This talk was inspired by my pet peeve of hearing people dismiss the Hebrew Bible by citing an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Who needs that? The Hebrew Bible is primitive and irrelevant today. After hearing this comment one too many times, I decided to investigate and get to the bottom of this eye for eye business. First, I went to Baha'i sources. One of the earliest mentions was Nabil's report that the Bab was reading the Bible while he was imprisoned and being treated by a Western doctor for a blow to his face. Dr. Cormick treated the barb and gave a long description of his impressions of the barb and wrote, "Of his doctrine I heard nothing from his own lips, although the idea was that there existed in his religion a certain approach to Christianity. He was seen by some Armenian carpenters who were sent to make some repairs in his prison, reading the Bible, and he took no pains to conceal it, but on the contrary, told them about it." What do the Baha'i writings say about the Bible? Quite a lot, but here are two of my favorites. The Bible and the Gospels are most honored in the estimation of all Baha'is. It is the religious duty of every Baha'i to read and comprehend the meanings of the Old and New Testament. Abdu'l-Baha, who also said you must know the Old and New Testaments as the Word of God. Now, those are heavy. As any anthropologist would tell us, every society, whether primitive or modern, has its code of laws, whether simple or complex, oral or written. The American jurist Joseph Bradley in the 19th century wrote, "Society cannot exist without law. Law is the bond of society, that which makes it, that which preserves it, and keeps it together. It is, in fact, the essence of civil society." To set the stage for Hammurabi, let's go back to about 4000 BC. Context is vitally important to understand spiritual history. Nothing comes out of nowhere. In the time of the first manifestation, the primal will appeared in Adam. Adam was the first manifestation of God in the 6,000-year cycle from about 4000 BC to 1844 AD, which is called the Adamic cycle. The prophet Adam's teachings are said to be lost, and they are, but we still do know a fair amount about his dispensation, although we can't go into that today. A key concept from the Genesis story is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This tree was the beginning of progressive moral codes for this cycle. The serpent represented humanity's immersion into a material world. Adam, man's lower nature, would till the soil among thorns and thistles. Eve, humanity's soul, would experience severe pain as she strove to give birth to higher consciousness by following divine law. The plan of God for humanity in this cycle is spiritual evolution, slow spiritual progress through several steps. Humanity could not skip vital steps in its progress, with the exception of a few amazing souls who have leapt to the spiritual finishing line. But we can't go into that today either. Previously, I mentioned the Adamic cycle of 6,000 years. Shoghi Effendi confirmed this when he wrote the following in 1952 about the launching of the 10-year plan. "Hail with feelings of humble thankfulness and unbounded joy, opening of the holy year, commemorating the centenary of the rise of the orb of Baha'u'llah's most sublime revelation, marking the consummation of the 6,000-year cycle ushered in by Adam, glorified by all past prophets and sealed with the blood of the author of the Babi dispensation." Also important to this program is an understanding of the spiritual seasons. Each prophet of God sets in motion spiritual energy that manifests itself as seasons, starting with the spiritual springtime. The coming of a divine teacher like Adam is the spiritual springtime of freshness and new growth, new teachings to infuse the people. Then comes the divine summer of fruition, the consolidation of new teachings and the maturation of spring's efforts. Inevitably, though, in time, the essence of the prophet's teachings are mostly forgotten, remembered primarily through folklore and mythology. And winter is that most desolate time of perversion of the spiritual teachings, of systemic corruption and immorality. Winter is when the truths of the divine dispensation are corrupted or forgotten, and then war, materialism, gross social inequality, and other ills prevail. And now, let's set the physical setting for this program. Here are the Tigris and Euphrates River and the empire of which Hammurabi was king, Mesopotamia. And this is the Fertile Crescent, which was the green belt. Abram came from Ur, and he went all the way to the Holy Land. In Egypt, where Moses led his people from, and where Jesus was born. The revelation of Adam was brought to Neolithic peoples living peacefully in small villages. Yes, peacefully. Archaeological excavations of Neolithic villages have uncovered little evidence of violence or war. They lived simply, growing crops and taking care of animals, and probably still hunting and gathering a bit, and probably had a reasonable level of social equality because everyone in the community was needed. The revelation of Adam triggered a flowering, an explosion of civilizational advancement, science and technology, the magnitude and speed of which would not be seen again until recent history, when another explosion of science, technology, cultural, and spiritual growth was triggered by the revelations of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Again, context is important. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers developed from small villages to large cities. The Mesopotamian region experienced the flow of the four spiritual seasons. Here's a partial list of the advancement in Mesopotamian civilization during its divine springtime and summer. And this is just a partial list. Cuneiform wedge writing, hydraulic engineering for canals, a plow that went 4 times deeper than the hoe, yokes and harnesses for animals, donkey-pulled wagons for intercity commerce, bricks, metallurgy, wool weaving, the potter's wheel, the sailboat, the astrolabe for naval navigation, tools like the pulley, lever, saw, and chisel, the arch, vault, and dome for massive construction projects, astronomy, the lunar calendar, the sundial, new pastoralism that used milk for yogurt and cheese, the sexagesimal system of mathematics based on the number 6 that is still in use today, like in our clocks, and more. However, inexorably, the slide into the spiritual fall and winter began. Social stratification became rigid with 3 classes: king, nobility, and priests, a middle class, of artisans, merchants, and freedmen, and at the bottom the slaves. Strict social codes like the Code of Hammurabi were designed to maintain this social order. Development of Mesopotamian culture also included war and the instruments of war. Humans were now domesticated into slavery and other forms of subservience, a process that is sometimes called hyper-domestication and has continued to this day. Great empires were built on warfare, and that continues today. The religion became polytheism to the nth degree. We don't know what Adam taught about polytheism, but it was probably spiritual corruption and disintegration of Adam's teachings that led to over 2,000 deities being worshipped, 5 of which are shown here. And each deity had a separate temple. Their images were lavished with every attention. The purpose of these gods was to run the world, and the purpose of humans was to serve them. This setup was a pragmatic quid pro quo that had little to do with spirituality. The gods appeared revered, but also feared, worshipped, but not trusted. They were beseeched, cajoled, supplicated as a force to be kept within bounds so that people could live their lives without malign interference. And here is the context for the Hammurabi Code. Enter Hammurabi, king of Babylon. He conquered other city-states to expand the Babylonian Empire. Now, there had always been codes of law for hundreds, thousands of years to govern commerce and agriculture, to compensate victims of crime, to punish violators of the law, and to keep the social order, law and order. Late in his reign, Hammurabi had a compilation made of the legal decisions made during his reign. In other words, the Code of Hammurabi was a body of case law, and it was not anticipated that this law would ever change. And it's also the most recent code available for Mesopotamia. The Code of Hammurabi was inscribed on a 4-ton stone slab and set up in the temple of Marduk, the god of Babylon. This is the only source of the code that is still available today, and it is now in the Louvre in Paris. The top of the stela, and here is the top, shows Hammurabi on the left, receiving the law from Shamash, the Babylonian god of justice, on the right. And the code is chiseled below, and the code was done over and over and set up in every city in Mesopotamia. And this is a brief summary of what the Hammurabi Code emphasizes. The format, if then, whether commercial, civil, or criminal, the results were preset. It emphasizes the laws of retribution, but also the laws of compensation and making whole. Both are according to class, but the emphasis is on making the victim whole as a measure of justice. The code admits no claim that is not substantiated by documents or the oath of witnesses. The code assumes innocence until proven guilty. Oh, does that sound familiar? Vicarious punishment. Okay, here's an example. If a man who has a son and that man kills another man who also has a son, the killer's son will be killed That is vicarious punishment. It's the Code of Hammurabi, this uniform law that prevailed throughout the empire, and its avowed purpose was justice, but within a rigid social hierarchy that determined specific punishments and compensations. The code has 3 sections: an introduction, a body of 282 case laws, and an epilogue. Here is one excerpt from the introduction to give you the flavor. When Abu the Sublime and Bel, the Lord of heaven and earth, assigned to Marduk, deity of Babylon, called by name me, Hammurabi, to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land, to destroy the wicked and evil doers, so that the strong should not harm the weak and enlighten the land, to further the well-being of mankind. We see here that the code was intertwined with the gods. And the Code of Hammurabi had 282 laws, which were really case law. Many covered the rules of commerce, agricultural arrangements, and what we would call warranties on work done. Here are 3 examples. If anyone hire a field laborer, he shall pay him 8 gur of corn per year. Okay. A gur equaled 800 US gallons, or about 12 shekels. And there seems to have been no adjustment allowed for inflation. So I guess they didn't have inflation as we know it. If anyone hire a skilled artisan, he shall pay his wages 5 gerahs. A potter, 5 gerahs. A tailor, 5 gerahs. But a rope maker, 4 gerahs per day. And 1 gerah equaled 1/20th of a shekel. This was not a market economy. Prices were expected to remain the same forever. If a shipbuilder build a boat for someone and do not make it tight, if during that same year the boat is sent away and suffers injury, the shipbuilder shall take the boat apart and put it together tight at his own expense. The tight boat he shall give to the boat owner, and that was a warranty. Now, capital punishment was very common in the Hammurabi Code. I found at least 25 cases calling for capital punishment by various means. And here are just a few that I'm putting up for comparison later when we get into the laws of Moses. If anyone bring an accusation of any crime before the elders and does not prove what he has charged, he shall, if it be a capital offense, charge be put to death. If a builder build a house for someone and does not construct it properly, and the house which he built fall in and kill its owner, then that builder shall be put to death. If conspirators meet in the house of a tavern keeper, and these conspirators are not captured and delivered to the court, the tavern keeper shall be put to death. Well, imagine that. And if anyone is committing a robbery and is caught, he shall be put to death. From what I studied, most of the cases of capital punishment seemed too harsh to be called justice, but at least everyone knew what the rules were. And it wasn't so far back in European history that the laws were terribly severe too. Mutilation, bodily mutilation was a common punishment. If a son of a paramour say to his adoptive father or mother, "You are not my father or my mother," his tongue shall be cut off. If a son strike his father, his hands shall be hewn off. If the slave of a freedman strike the body of a freedman, his ear shall be cut off. If anyone agree with another to tend his field, give him seed, entrust a yoke of oxen to him, and bind him to cultivate the field, if he steal the corn or plants and take them for himself, his hands shall be hewn off. If a slave says to his master, "You are not my master," if they convict him, the master shall cut his ear off. Now, these are the criminal punishments. There are also a lot of other codes that were very fair and protected the rights of women and really protected the rights of merchants and on and on. But we don't have time to go into that. But we are going to go to an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. The original source in context. And here you will see the class system and unequal punishments. Here it is. If a freeborn man, that means a man who was born free, strike the body of another freeborn man or equal rank, he shall pay 1 gold mina, which is 60 shekels. If a freed man, that means he was born a slave but attained his freedom, strike the body of another freed man, he shall pay 10 shekels in money. If the slave of a freed man strike the body of a freed man, his ear shall be cut off. If a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be cut out. If he break another man's bones, his bones shall be broken. If he put out the eye of a freed man or break the bone of a freed man, he shall pay 1 gold mina. If he put out the eye of a man's slave or break the bone of a man's slave, he shall pay 1/2 of the slave's value to the owner. If a man knock out the teeth of his equal, his teeth shall be knocked out. If he knock out the teeth of a freed man, he shall pay 1/3 of a gold mina, 20 shekels. Okay. That is how it is. The Code of Hammurabi starts with an epilogue. And this is what it says. It ends with an epilogue. The king who ruleth among the kings of the cities am I. My words are well considered. There is no wisdom like unto mine. By the command of Shamash, the great judge of heaven and earth, let righteousness go forth in the land. By order of Marduk, my Lord, let no destruction befall my monument. In future times, through all coming generations, let the king, who may be in the land, observe the words of righteousness which I have written on my monument. Let him not alter the law of the land which I have given, the edicts which I have enacted, my monument, let him not mar. The code's purpose was stasis, change nothing. However, God got the last laugh here, and he's probably still laughing. About the same time as the Hammurabi Code was finalized, a young man named Abram in the city of Ur mocked the deities. He was exiled, went to Haran, and then went to the land of Canaan, where he pursued his ministry as a manifestation of God. So from Ur up to Haran, and down to the land of Canaan. Now we will look for context for the eye for eye, tooth for tooth in Mosaic law. We're going to look at the Mosaic codes, the 10 Commandments, the Covenant Code, the Holiness Code, the Leviticus Code. As we remember, in the time of Hammurabi and Moses, the social conditions were much, much different from ours. There were no police, no prisons, no rehab centers, no halfway houses, no understanding of mental illness, no psychological therapy. Security within nomadic communities and small villages was paramount. Trust and justice were foundational to social order, and there were no locks on the doors. So punishment had to be swift and fair. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the 10 Commandments. These are not secular laws, but spiritual laws from the one God. Breaking them was not only a civil or criminal offense, but a sin. And imagine a society where these 10 laws ruled supreme in people's lives. Imagine a society with no theft, no adultery, no murder, where teenagers honored their parents. Oh, well, in our imagination. When Moses was preparing to climb up Mount Sinai, the Lord descended noisily in smoke, thunder, and lightning. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But do not have God speak to us, or we will die." Moses replied, "Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning." And the fear of God is commented upon by Baha'u'llah. In truth, religion is a radiant light and an impregnable stronghold for the protection and welfare of the peoples of the world. For the fear of God impelleth the man to hold fast to that which is good and shun all evil. Should the lamp of religion be obscured, chaos and confusion will ensue, and the lights of justice, fairness, tranquility, and peace cease to shine. And my own comment is we are seeing that today, of course, when religion too often is not a radiant light in our secular society. The Covenant Code immediately follows the 10 Commandments. It's several chapters long and was written on stone tablets with the 10 Commandments. And Genesis says it was then carried down the mountain by Moses. The Covenant Code has many parallels with Hammurabi's, but also some surprises. Everything from Mosaic Law came from God. Transgressions were sins. What was against the social order in Mesopotamia would be spiritually immoral for the Hebrews. Now, we are going to cut with a fine knife through the Covenant Code to find the context for eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Here's what I found for capital punishment in the Covenant Code. It's a much shorter list than the 25 that I found in the Hammurabi Code. Murder, unless unintentional, attacks on the father or mother, curses father or mother, kidnapping a fellow Israelite to sell as a slave, if because of owner's negligence a bull gores a person to death, unless it's a slave, the owner shall be put to death. But sometimes restitution could be arranged instead. Bestiality and idolatry. Okay, and here we are again with eye for eye, tooth for tooth in context. And here, please notice that class is not mentioned. If people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined, whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. However, there are no recorded incidents of mutilation in the Covenant Code or the book of Leviticus or the book of Deuteronomy. There are innumerable examples of what we would call personal injury law, but all of them were observed through restitution or making whole. The conservative Christian publication Christianity Today ran a fascinating article about life for life, eye for eye. Here's an excerpt. An eye for eye seems to be a simplistic form of justice that is focused on retribution. Yet this phrase is found 3 times in the Old Testament. Many people wonder if the phrase life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise was applied literally. In Jewish oral tradition called the Talmud, and among Christian scholars, the consensus is no. This was not taken literally, but instead used as a standard by judges to set the fine and appropriately punish the perpetrator of the harm he caused. Under Jewish law, legal standards of proportionate justice are found in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy for crimes such as murder, physical abuse, harming an infant, or framing someone for a crime would still apply in a court. Many of our modern expectations for equal justice and reparation find a basis in ancient Jewish law. Now, the Covenant Code also set a moral code far beyond what the intent of the Hammurabi Code set, which was not concerned with moral values. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you are foreigners in Egypt. Well, I wish this country would listen to that at the southern border. Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you loan money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not treat it like a business deal. Charge no interest. Do not spread false reports. Do not help a guilty person by making a malicious witness. Do not deny justice to your poorer people in their lawsuits. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. Now, the Sabbath was given in the 10 Commandments. 6 days to labor and the 7th day to rest and not do any work. And the law of the Sabbath was monumental. Never before had a regular day of rest been recognized that we know of. It was repeated in the covenant code to include the welfare of work animals and the land. 6 days do your work, on the seventh day do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and so that the slave born in your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. And then the Sabbath was extended to the land. For 6 years, you are to sow your fields and harvest the crops, but during the 7th year, let the land lie unplowed and unused. Then the poor among your people may get food from it, and the wild animals may eat what is left. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive grove. And I suspect that this was also actually good agricultural practice to let the soil replenish itself. The holiness cord in Leviticus. The book of Leviticus gives innumerable and exacting laws about sacrifices, laws governing the priests, the laws of clean and unclean, and I'm going to spare you all of that. The Holiness Code is 10 chapters, and we will use surgical precision to extract what we need to set the context for eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Starting again with capital punishment, I found 10 in this code, and they are all pretty much the same as what we have seen before. And then we reach sacrificing one's children to Moloch. Moloch was a Canaanite deity who evidently, it was believed, demanded the sacrifice of children in order to do his job for the Canaanite people. Incest, adultery was there before. Incest, including in-laws and step relations, although some categories mention dishonor rather than death. Practicing mediumship or spiritism. Why do you think that's there? I think it's because it takes people's attention away from God and sets them off searching in a superstitious and very self-centered manner. And blasphemy. I think this is a new for blasphemy. Mutilation. Oh, here we are again. These verses pop in out of nowhere about eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Anyone who takes the life of someone's animal must make restitution, life for life. Anyone who injures their neighbor is to be injured in the same manner. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The one who has inflicted the injury must suffer the same injury. Anyone who fractures their neighbor, who injures their neighbor, is to be injured in the same manner. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The one who has inflicted the injury must suffer the same injury. But again, there are no other examples of mutilation as punishment in the book of Leviticus. I think that these two verses are giving emphasis to making the victim whole in an appropriate way, a symbolic way, by making restitution, such as paying the medical bills and other costs. How would injuring the perpetrator make the victim's life whole? And we have a list of do nots. Do not have sexual relations with a man as with a woman. That is detestable. And Baha'u'lláh did reinforce that. Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight. Back then, day workers in the fields were paid at the end of the day. If they did not get paid, they and their families would probably go hungry. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, but fear your God. They did not have the same empathy for handicapped people that we are used to today, or measures to help them. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord. Do not practice divination or seek omens. Again, this is superstition that takes the person away from God. Do not cut your bodies for the dead, which was a way of mourning, or put tattoo marks on yourselves. I am the Lord. When I was at the World Center, a member of the House of Justice gave a talk for the youth, and the adults were also welcome to attend, and I did. And what I really remember from this talk was how much this person hated tattoos. He mentioned the body as being held, being a temple for the soul. And tattoos were a denigration of the body as the temple of one's soul. And he begged the youth there, do not ever get tattoos, please. Do not use dishonored standards when measuring length, weight, and quantity, and do not eat the blood because it is life. This is the foundation of kosher dietary law. And when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. And this was a form of charity for the poor. Now, there are two other commandments from the Holiness Code that dwarf everything else, that provide the spiritual foundation for the Israelites. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Sound familiar? We associate this with Jesus, who, as a prophet of God, taught this eternal verity. The Pharisees asked Jesus what was the most important law of God. They were hoping to trap him into a theological argument. Jesus answered, the most important one is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. The messengers, the prophets of God, repeat the spiritual verities, and this is an example. Moses also set the moral bar at the ultimate level. Be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Please, if you are ever tempted to dismiss the Hebrew Bible because of an eye for eye, tooth for tooth, please do keep in mind the foregoing, and Moses teaches on loving our neighbors as ourselves and aspiring to be holy. and all the other enlightened do's and don'ts. And if you hear anyone else dismissing the Hebrew Bible because of the eye for eye, please remind them where love thy neighbor as thyself was first uttered, and where be holy came from. And in regard to this, as though the preceding wasn't enough, the Lord designated appointed festivals, religious festivals for the people. The Sabbath was repeated and given as one of them. Then Passover, the offering of the first fruits, the festival of weeks, Shavuot, the festival of trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the festival of tabernacles, Sukkot, the Sabbath, repeated from the Ten Commandments. The appointment of the religious celebrations was very important and a new first, as far as we know, in a divine revelation. Moses' teachings could be reinforced with 52 Sabbaths per year and 6 religious celebrations each year. This was designed to turn people's minds to God. And they could also strengthen the family ties and community life. The Deuteronomic code. I try to pronounce that sometime. Deuteronomic, sure. The book of Deuteronomy is a partial repetition of the laws given previously. It is primarily Moses' preparation of his people for their entrance into the promised land. It's a fervent call for faithfulness to God. And it's Moses' farewell to his people. Again, we will use surgical precision to review the eye for eye, tooth for tooth in the context we find it, plus a few surprises. Capital punishment. I've only listed the capital punishments that are new in the book of Deuteronomy. If a prophet or one who foretells through dreams, describes signs and wonders, and says to follow other gods, that prophet of dreams must be put to death. Also, anyone tries to entice others to turn to other gods must be put to death after thorough investigation. Idolatry, when witnessed by 2 or 3 people and after investigation. Well, I can tell you absolutely that this was not followed, that as soon as the Israelites entered the promised land, many did adopt the gods of the Canaanites, and the prophets, the canonical prophets railed against this situation for years, for hundreds of years, and showing contempt for the judge or for the priest who makes a decision in a case brought to him. You must purge evil from Israel. This is stated many times. Okay, here we are, the third and last time of the theme, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, in context. If a malicious witness takes the stand to accuse someone of crime, the 2 people involved in the dispute must stand in the presence of the Lord before the priests and the judges who are in office at the time. The judges must make a thorough investigation, and if the witness proves to be a liar, giving false testimony against a fellow Israelite, then do to the false witness as that witness intended to do to the other party. You must purge the evil from you, from among you. The rest of the people will hear of this and be afraid, and never again will such an evil thing be done among you. Show no pity. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. And again, I don't know of any example in Deuteronomy of mutilation actually being carried out. If you find one, please let me know. In addition to repeating the laws given in the two previous codes, there are several more that are really important. The law of tithing every year, but every 3 years, the agricultural tithes would be stored, not only for the support of the Levites, the priesthood, but also for the foreigners and the poor. And the Lord will bless you for the work of your hands. Appoint judges and officials in every town to judge the people fairly. Follow justice and justice alone. Can you imagine how improved our society would be if judges ruled only according to justice and justice alone? Designate cities of refuge to which those who innocently kill someone can flee from blood revenge, but the guilty will be returned to his town and turned over to officials. Parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children to be put to death for their parents. Each will die for their own sin. Here we have vicarious punishment abrogated. Only charge a foreigner interest, not an Israeli. And a 7-year debt cancellation. 7 years? Yes. Every 7 years, debts were to be canceled, except in the commercial area, between businessmen. Debt cancellation had been used in Mesopotamia for hundreds, if not thousands of years, when needed to renew the economy and return society to quote-unquote normal, by returning the land to peasants who had sold themselves into debt slavery, by giving poor people renewed opportunity, and by dismantling what we call monopolies or conglomerates that dominated markets. All loans made to fellow Israelites were to be canceled. If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites, be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought, oh my, the 7th year, the year for canceling debts is near. Give generously to them and do so without a grudging heart. Then, because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. If any Hebrew man or woman sold themselves to serve for 6 years, in the 7th they must be freed and supplied liberally from the owner's flocks and food. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt and the Lord redeemed you. That is why I give you this command today. Now, today the concept of debt forgiveness is a taboo subject, and in some areas a political subject. But imagine what it could accomplish to stabilize our society and narrow the difference between our rich and poor. It would be different, of course, but it's a fascinating concept. And if the Israelites followed God's laws, This is what he would do. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt so that you would no longer be slaves to the Egyptians. I broke the bars of your yoke and enabled you to walk with heads held high. However, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am giving you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. 53 verses follow that give every sort of imaginable calamity and punishment that you can imagine. And I do have to say at this point that this certainly looks like the falling of the old world order today. Moses gave highly enlightened codes of conduct, and Baha'u'lláh reinforced Moses' emphasis on rewards and punishments. He wrote, the structure of world stability and order hath been reared upon and will continue to be sustained by the twin pillars of reward and punishment. And in another connection, he hath uttered the following in the eloquent tongue. Justice hath a mighty force at its command. It is none other than reward and punishment for the deeds of men. By the power of this force, the tabernacle of order is established throughout the world, causing the wicked to restrain their natures for fear of punishment. There's nothing old-fashioned about divine reward and punishment. Baha'u'lláh reinforced this concept, and a secular society ignores this at its peril. Oh, change of topic. The third volume of The Coming of the Glory is here. Doesn't looking at all three covers of this trilogy feel good? Most of my presentations are based on what I have written in these books, although the books go into much, much more detail that I can't go into during PowerPoint presentations. And we are in the middle of a pre-order campaign for 20% discount with an extra 5% for Clearwater Baha'i viewers. And these pre-order Baha'i pre-order offers for this book launch are shown here. These are posted in the chat box. There are 3 different offers at discount. In addition, there is an extra 5% discount by coupon for Clearwater Baha'is. If you enter Clearwater 5 and then click enter to validate before paying, you get a 25% discount. Okay, Jeremiah, I am going to stop sharing, and Jeremiah is going to click the button and show the 1-minute video about my trilogy. And I believe here it comes.
Enter the ancient tapestry of Israel's prophetic legacy with the Coming of the Glory book series. Volume 1 unveils the foundational pillars of Israel's history, from the patriarch Abraham to the prophetic mantle carried by Elijah. Volume 2 immerses you in a world of turmoil and revelation, where prophets like Jonah, Amos, Isaiah, and Jeremiah stand as beacons of courage. Volume 3 delves deep into the tapestry of biblical exploration, weaving threads of insight, into the enduring struggle between belief systems. Experience the triumphs and trials of the Israelite from exile to restoration, guided by prophets and divine intervention. Embark on a quest of discovery and revelation with the Coming of the Glory series, a harmonious blend of history and prophecy. Secure your copy today.
Thank you, Jeremiah. You were really on top of that. And I guess I'll turn it over to John for questions and answers.
Hello there. Welcome. Thank you everyone for having asked questions in the chat. If you have a question, please post them in the chat. Of course, comments on social media, Jeremiah is taking a look for them too. But there is one question, and it pertains to something that people may have gone on Netflix and seen the show about Jesus, The Chosen. And there's an interesting commercial that they have for people to get introduced to this series and watch the story about Jesus. And there's this quote, "Do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath, for it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord." So there's this quote in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 35. And it's a very interesting passage. And in the New King James Version, it's written, "Vengeance is mine, and recompense. Their foot shall slip in due time, but the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things to come hasten upon them." So are we to say that though in the context of the Bible, you have a lot of people quoting eye for an eye, that vengeance, and you had mentioned this, Eileen, earlier in your talk about the religious rulers and the rulers in charge. It is the role of the government to institute vengeance on behalf of the Lord, or is it left to God entirely?
That's a very interesting question. And I think it's very layered. I mean, the quotation from Deuteronomy is very layered. Jesus definitely gave good advice. He was trying to get his followers not to pick fights and all of that, or even respond to them. I would say this, Baha'u'llah reinforced reward and punishment. As far as governments go, they can only do so much, but they do have a duty to enforce reward and punishment. There is also spiritual punishment, as Baha'u'llah said, and there are also situations that are totally beyond us to handle. And without getting political, like the Middle East. But God has a plan. And so what Deuteronomy says is also true. God has a plan. And we are watching the collapse of our society. That's part of God's plan. And it's beyond what our governments are able or willing to handle. Now, I hope this makes sense. So basically how I'm answering it is there are some situations that only God can handle, as Deuteronomy says, that quotation. Could you repeat that quotation for me, please, so I can get this right?
Sure. So from Deuteronomy, verse 35, we have, vengeance is mine and recompense. Their foot shall slip in due time. The day of their calamity is at hand, and the things to come hasten upon them.
Well, I wouldn't argue with that. My study of the Hebrew Bible indicates that God is an actor in history. The prophets talk about this a lot. And yes, and that's my answer.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, a question from the audience as well. How do we learn more about the Code of Hammurabi?
The question is,
How do we learn more about the Code of Hammurabi?
oh, very, very easy. You just go online, you go to Code of Hammurabi, and it's either the second or the third or the fourth choice. It's the choice that comes from Yale University. They did an excellent printed presentation on the Code of Hammurabi, and they give all of the introduction, all 282 laws, and all of the epilogue. So look for the Yale University version. Not that there aren't other good ones, but I use the one from Yale.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We appreciate it. So, with that being said, I don't see another question here online. I've been taking a look. I don't see any more. I want to thank you so much. Jeremiah posted the link in the chat for the Yale link for those of you interested. And with that being said, we thank you very much, Eileen, for being here with us today and for sharing this with us in your presentation. And again, we thank you for spending time to go through the effort to explain so much that, well, a lot of people just don't know about simply because they don't read. But even though even though people may choose to read, it's so difficult to not get the context in which the language is, and it requires even further reading people don't even realize. So we're thankful that you went through and helped us to provide some context and hopefully inspiration that we can all go and read ourselves too. So we thank you for that, and all of you who have been watching here today. Hopefully you're inspired, and they say you reap what you sow. Literally, Eileen is reaping what she's sown by actually going through and providing all of this for us. We hope you do too, so you can have a understanding of our religious past, so that we can better understand our future and hopefully avoid repeating mistakes of the past just as much as they were there to help us come to this present and build a better future. So we have some members of the audience saying thank you. And again, likewise, Eileen, Clearwater Baha'is, on behalf of everybody here, we thank you so much for being here. And we hope all of you in the audience have a beautiful Sunday. We look forward to next week. And until then, please do your research, everyone. Bye.
Bye.